How's it going, everyone? Welcome to Double Pebble. Right, today I would like to talk about savings and investments, whether you should do exclusively one of them or both of them, right? So, we start off by talking about savings. The habits of saving has been around, I don't know, since ancient times when people barter trade goods, meat, and then along the way when money was invented, people started finding other ways to save their money. In the olden times, we would have our grandparents and ancestors saving money in metal tins or under the pillow because there are no better ways to save it, right? Of course, in recent times, we have more technology. Most of us put our money in the bank, right? Our parents' era, I would imagine most of them are saving their money, be it in the standard savings account or fixed Ds, right? I think that's very common. You always hear your parents, putting their money in fixed deposits. Of course, what we know is that savings accounts have basically negligible interest, right? 0.05% thereabout, which is essentially nothing. These days, we have slightly more options with things like the UOB One account that can give you on average about 3.3% interest per annum if you meet the criteria, or you can have the OCBC 360 accounts that gives you about 2.45% if you jump through all the hoops, right? Or how about fixed deposit rate? Currently, it is also at about 2.45%. T-bills are even worse these days, 1.73%. So for the uninitiated, you might say, hey, my money are still growing when I put it in the bank, right? But of course, there's one big thing that we did not factor in, and that is inflation. Now, according to some sources online, it says that the global inflation rate is currently at about 2.95%, right? It means that your money is getting smaller at 2.95% a year, right? So if you are saving your money that gives you interest of 0.05%, essentially your money is getting smaller and smaller every day. I think all of us knows the effect of inflation and how that really affects our buying power. For those around my age, you will know back in the days, $2 can get you a plate of chicken rice, maybe 2.50, right? To be fair. These days, you go to a food court for chicken rice, you probably have to pay around $4, 4.50, maybe even $5. So that is inflation at work, right? Last time with $5 you can get two plates of chicken rice. These days with $5 you can get one. So you can see your purchasing power decreases because of inflation. Now, does that mean that savings are not important, that you should invest all your money? Of course not, right? Because we know that savings are still important because it is the most liquid form of storing your cash. You can withdraw anytime you want. So it is still important to have savings in case of emergency. We do not want a scenario when we suddenly need a large amount of money and we have to liquidate our stocks or bonds or whatever you're doing in order to meet the emergency, right? So it's really important to still have a healthy amount of cash savings in case you lose your job, touch wood, there's some illness. All this requires cash, right? In the previous video, we talked about 6 months as a sort of agreed benchmark for your emergency savings, but there's really no hard and fast rule. Like I was sharing in the last video that I saved about 2.5 years worth of emergency funding for my family, such that in the event that both my wife and I lost our job, we still can so-called hang on for another 2.5 years, which should be enough time for us to find new jobs, right? So you have to decide for yourself how much emergency savings you need. Yes? Now let's switch gears a little bit to investments. Of course, this is exciting for most people because you are growing your money. We use an analogy. Savings is sort of like a raincoat. It protects you against harsh weather. Whereas investment is like planting a tree. You are watering the seed and eventually it becomes a tree and it bears fruit and you will reap the reward. So this is sort of how you see between savings and investments, right? So let's talk about investment. Why is it important? Because historically speaking, investment produce higher returns over a long period of time compared to savings. And in most cases, when you put your money in the banks, what they do is to take your money and invest, producing a higher return so that they can give you your peanuts. So using an S&P 500, the most classic sort of index as an example, since 1957, the average return for S&P 500 is about 10.3%. Of course, it sounds sexy the way we put it, right? 10.3% every year over about 70 years. But along the way, as you can see in the graph, there are many years where you have losses. So it goes back to the psychology of money management, whether you have the stomach to see a 35% drop in your portfolio, such as in 2008 during the Lehman Brothers collapse, and tide through the tough times. Again, the best way to invest your money is to buy into something, be it a stock, an index, and sort of forget about it. Of course, for stocks, you have to monitor a little bit more compared to index, but that will go on into further details in other videos. But for investment, of course, everybody is worried about losses, right? Myself included. I've had stock picks that lost me 50%, which I'll touch on. For example, Alibaba and Kraft I've got stock picks that went up by 300%. But it's really about the control of your mental emotions to try and have a balance. I will be the first to admit that even till this day, when I invest, I still feel a little bit of fear in terms of where the company will going. The latest that I've invested is in United Health, which you guys would know dropped by more than 60% since its all-time high. But are there ways to reduce risk? The answer is yes, right? I'll just give a few examples and then we go into more details in other videos. For example, time horizon. If you look at the S&P 500 chart, across 60, 70 years, it looks extremely sexy, right? It goes from such a low price all the way to an all-time high right now. If you zoom into the day by day or the month by month view of the S&P 500, you will see there is a lot of fluctuation, right? So one important way of reducing risk is to increase your time horizon, which means investing and sort of hold it for 30 years so that your investment is sort of zoom out rather than the daily up and downs that will give you heart attacks, right? Another thing, of course, is dollar cost averaging. We'll talk about that in another video. I'll probably focus a full video on dollar cost averaging and the pros and cons of that. Long story short, DCA is a good way to reduce your risk, but it also limits your gains in a way, right? So everything is sort of average out. The last method that I can think of off the top of my head right now is, of course, diversification. Conventional thinking say you don't put all your eggs in one basket. Again, I'll talk about that in another video. Warren Buffett says that you should actually focus your investing instead rather than buy into, let's say, 200 over stocks. There's pros and cons for both of them. We will talk about that in another video. So the last thing that I really wanted to talk about is the savings habit, right? Because in order for you to invest, especially if we are just starting out in our careers, we need some form of capital. So that capital comes from our savings habits. Many of you would probably hear about the 50, 30, 20 sort of rule, which means that you spend 50% on your needs, 30% on your wants, and then you save or invest the 20%. There are other school of thoughts that say that you need to spend 60% on your fixed costs, those that you cannot run one. Every day you must spend, for example, like bills, giving your parents allowance, food, transport, these things cannot run. And then 10% in your savings, 10% in your investments, and the rest of the 20% you can do whatever you want with it. You can buy anything you want with it, right? I got this from, of course, another YouTuber that I was watching called Ramit Sethi. I think his video is quite nice. I learned quite a lot from him as well. But by and large, I feel like there is no right answer in terms of how to go about savings. What is the correct method? There's no correct method. It's what you're comfortable with and it's what that is producing results. By results, I mean whether your savings are increasing. So the last part of this video, I just want to share about how I save money. Some of you might think it's crazy. Some of you might think that it's extremist, but I'm comfortable with that, right? So I was a lot more stringent when I was doing my PhD compared to now because I didn't have kids back then. So my fixed costs are a lot more predictable compared to now. So what I did during my PhD was basically every month when I received my stipend, I would immediately transfer $500 into my spending account. So I have two bank accounts, a savings bank account and a spending bank account. So every month, my stipend was I think 3.5K. So I will take that $500 and put into the spending account, and I have a balance of 3K. So that balance, I will put it into my savings account, right? So essentially, this is paying yourself first, which is the most important thing when it comes to saving money. You have to pay yourself first. So the moment you receive your paycheck, you need to cut off one portion for your spending over the next month. The rest, you keep it. At least that's how I do it, right? Now, whenever I share this, people look at me as if I'm crazy. Like $500, is it enough to survive for a whole month? For me, it is lah, because I don't have many things that I want, right? When I was studying, every day travel costs about, let's say, $4. Two trips. So $4 times 5, plus weekend you go out. So 6 days of $4 is about $25. $25, I multiply it by 4 over a whole month, that is $100. So transport is $100. And then those days, eating in school is a little bit cheaper. So every day I give myself $5 to eat for lunch. So 25 times 4, that's another $100. So food is $100. Next, dating with my then girlfriend. Those days you can watch movie for about $25 for 2 tickets, right? So I usually budget about $50 per weekend for dating spendings. So 50 times 4, that's 200. So total now we're at 400. I still have $100 for me to spend on whatever I want. Sometimes in those days I would spend it on FIFA, but not really that common, right? That was how I survived on $500. But again, it goes back to you. What are you comfortable with, right? You can decide how much you need for spending, but the key is to put that amount into a spending account so that all you see is that amount. And it really makes a difference because let's say you're doing some bank transfer or you were withdrawing and then you see like, oh, I'm just left with $100 to spend. Subconsciously, it makes you a little bit more thrifty compared to if you were to see your whole savings amount, right? So that's how I do my savings. And then for the rest of my savings, I basically look for opportunity to invest. By and large, I like to invest lump sums because the potential gains are bigger. Of course, the risk is a little bit higher. These days, I start to DCA because I think I've accumulated enough cash. I don't really want to keep accumulating more cash. At the same time, the market is overvalued, so there's no point putting lump sum into anything right now. So I'm just putting a little bit automatically into S&P 500 for now. Yeah, so this video is really just to share a little bit about my views on savings and investments, which is better. To summarize, basically both are important. You need to have a stable savings before you can invest. You can't really do without either of them. They are symbiotic, right? So I hope you guys find this video helpful. Let me know in the comment section below how you guys go about savings and how you manage your own personal finance. I'll be happy to hear them. And don't forget to click like, share and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.